I talk to people literally all across the country, and they tell me about the land they're looking at, some certain deals they're checking out. And honestly, there are some places where it's like, no, you just shouldn't do a deal there, right? Like, no, you should not be in that city. No, you should maybe not be even in that state, right? Like, use some of these principles here. Take a look at the metrics. Take a look at the government there. What are the rules? How are the regs set up? Are they set up in your favor, or are they really just a bunch of hoops and paperwork in front of you so that, really you fail and they have less work to do? What's up, mansion builders? Welcome back to the show. I want to talk to you today about potentially moving across the country to do a deal like this. So for context, Laura and I used to live in California. We were in Orange County, and we had a real estate investment company there. We wanted to get into this space to build our first memory care mansion. And this was like 2018. So we decided that California was not the place for us. We wanted to move our family, and we were looking for different opportunities, really lots of different states and places across the country. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Is this something that you're in a space or a place where you're like, I really want to do this. I have the heart for it. The numbers make amazing sense, but I just don't think that my spot is right? Like, we are in a very expensive part of the country, and the regulations and all sorts of different things. So I want to unpack this today. Should you say, hey, you know what, we are packing up our family or moving across the country? If so, what kind of place, what state, where should I go? What kind of city should I be looking for? And does it make sense for me to actually move to be able to do a big deal like this? So I want to talk about this from a couple different angles, but let's start from like the government's perspective, right? You as a business person, you who need a license from the state, who has to go through permits from the city and the county, what kind of cities and states and things should you do business in? Because in my opinion, there are some states that are just not business friendly, right? I left one of those places, right, where they want to tax the crap out of you, and the cost of real estate and everything is just so crazy high. So we decided we are not going to pursue this in California. Part of the reason was because of the rules and the regs, right? What does it take to get a permit through to build new construction, right? What does it take to get your license? And honestly, state by state, it is so different. So I moved to Texas, and relatively compared to California, it is a cakewalk, right? Now, there are states that are just as easy as Texas, and there are states that are like more difficult than California. So I think this is an important consideration for you. Depending on what state you are in, there are some states where it's like, they really don't want you to succeed. They don't really care, right? It's set up as, just a bunch of box checkers, right? You have to check all of these different things. And practically speaking, if you have hundreds of millions of dollars and you're part of this big company that's going around building these big 4-story buildings, right? Like, you can do that. You have a team for that. You have the development for that. But honestly, it kind of leaves two sides, the really too big, right? The big corporate, the big smelly facility, and then it leaves like just the tiny little RELs, right? The dinky little 6-beds. That's like, well, that wasn't for me either, right? There is a place for both of those, but there's not a place that I see for someone to come in the middle, right? If you're not big corporate, if you're, smaller family or smaller investment team, you know what? You just don't have the capital and the finances to fight and get through some of these big regulations and costs and things in some of these areas in these states. And so it really, if you don't want to go that dinky little REL, direction, then it puts you in this space where like, well, at least in my opinion, I didn't think I could do the deal that I wanted to in my state. So you know what I did? I up and left, right? Like, I am not a tree, I can leave. So I would encourage you in some circumstances to consider this. For me, it was amazing. My kids were young. We were looking for an opportunity, a business opportunity, a family opportunity, right? Like, the timing was great. We were searching for the right thing. So sometimes that might be the case for you, but it's not for everyone, right? Just because you're not in the right city doesn't mean that you have to move halfway across the country like we did. You might get to your destination and be like, this place sucks, right? Like, man, Texas is way hotter and more bugs and all sorts of stuff than I thought it was going to be. I mean, we were in Southern California, right? The weather was perfect. But nonetheless, there's no way in heck I would ever go back, right? And the other part of it is you actually have to be happy where you're going to be. You can't just pick a random spot, be like, hey, You know what? Actually, people ask me this, like, Brett, just tell me where to go. Tell me what the best city is, and I'll go there. And I'm like, really? Just because I tell you this one city, you're going to move your family and you're going to go over there? I'm like, that doesn't make sense, man. Like, you know, you actually are going to get there and you're either going to love the city or hate the city or somewhere in between, right? Like, your business success depends so much on you. And you, honestly, you need to pick a place where you're going to be happy, right? Like, I could tell you here statistically the best places to go, but that might not be great for you. You might really dislike the climate or, you know, the culture there, right? Like, if you have family in a certain area and it happens to check off a good amount of boxes, man, I would highly consider that. So let's unpack this a little bit, because it's not just state by state, right? There's not good states and bad states as far as licensure and rules and regs and things. There's also other considerations. There's also cities, right? Other governments that have a effect on this. And then we'll talk about finance and all sorts of other things. But let's say, for example, right, Texas is, I think, a very business-friendly state from an assisted living perspective. That does not mean that everywhere in every single city in Texas is a great deal that you can do this, right? For example, I am just north of Austin, and Austin itself, I think, is a terrible place to do this for the sake of the city, right? It's still in the same state. There's still the same regulations, but the actual city of Austin itself for permits and things like that is a nightmare. So I would never do a deal inside the city limits of Austin. The surrounding cities outside of that, I would, right? But just because you're in a certain state, that's not all you have to consider. What about other cities here? So if you were in a city that was very difficult as far as permits and things like that, man, what about just the next city over? Because honestly, I've been a part of a bunch of different city meetings where our partners are going through, talking to the planning and zoning and all the different things, and they're saying, hey, here's what we want to do. And the city says, okay, well, yeah, that's fine. You know, here's the hoops and here's the process. You know, for what you want to do, it's probably like, 6 to 9 months before we can give you a definitive yes or no. And you're like, well, but I have like 60 days to buy the land, right? I got to figure out the deal here. And they're like, okay, yeah, I know. Well, here's what it is. You buy the land or you don't. But, you know, we can't tell you yes or no for like another 7 months or something. You're like, man, well, that puts a lot of risk on this deal, right? Those are cities that I'd be like, no, we should not work in this city. Okay, the population, the income, all that kind of stuff aside, if they cannot give me a clear yes or no within a reasonable time frame on doing this kind of deal, or a lot of times they're asking for the whole moon, right? They want you to put in all sorts of different things. You need solar panels and you need like flamingo protection agencies and just the most crappy, stupid stuff they're gonna throw in there. It's like, that is ridiculous, right? Like, all of that has a price tag and they're just making stuff up. So cities like that, I would just say like, hey, you know what? Let's check the next city over, right? There are some cities that are business friendly and some, they just have too many boxes to check. You can follow the pattern of the trends. Where are the places around the country that everyone is leaving, right? And where are the places that everyone is going to? And a lot of times people are leaving for financial reasons, and they're going to certain states or cities for financial reasons also, again, for business. So if you're gonna ask, hey, Brett, where should I go? Well, take a look around. Where's everybody moving to, right? Are they going there because of the weather, or are they going there because of the political climate or the economic climate? Is it easier to raise a family in that area? Those are some of the things that I would consider if I'm looking for a new area to go to open something like this. So the next thing I think is really important to consider is the numbers. Is your area really expensive? I came from a very affluent area and the cost to buy land was literally millions of dollars. And again, that doesn't push forward to the bottom line being, I'm gonna make this much more profit. When you take some of these numbers in different areas, just the cost of land, the cost to build, the cost for staffing, right? Like, you can have a high rent, but it doesn't mean you're gonna make that high profit. And sometimes in certain areas, it's kind of the opposite. You might have a medium rent, and then all of your expenses, all of your land, all of your cost to build will give you a nice, awesome profit. So I think this is kind of a balancing act, and it's really just sampling and learning different markets. And here are some of the things that I would say is that there is just some areas, right? You take like San Francisco or Orange County, Newport Beach, California, like some of these areas, and man, it's just cost prohibitive to do a deal like this, right? Unless you were that big company coming in and you're going to build this huge development. And a lot of times you can layer these different types of incomes, right? You can layer like the independent living apartment style and have that kind of income. And you're able to do some of these deals that if you're just exclusively going to build assisted living or memory care, it doesn't really pencil out the same, right? If you're too small in that, right? If you're kind of middle size, then a lot of times it doesn't work. So again, for me, I decided to move because the cost of land was crazy expensive. And then the cost of construction. Again, in some states, it can be $400 a square foot. And then in other states, it can be $150, $175 a square foot, right? It's literally the exact same materials. It doesn't really cost anything more in materials, right? It's just the labor and it's all the things and how that stuff goes, right? So just because you're in a market where you might be able to charge $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 a month for rents doesn't mean you're going to make a huge profit. Because honestly, a lot of times I'll run the numbers for one of our partners there, and they're in a very affluent area. But the cost to build and then the cost for labor, that's really the biggest thing right there, right? If you have to pay $25 or $27 an hour for your caregivers, man, you know what that does to your profit? If you look at me, right, I'm averaging $8,000 a month here in Georgetown, Texas. Very kind of middle of the road as far as country, like the cost of things. Okay, we're paying $18 an hour. The net profit that I can make at $8,000 a month of income versus some of these other areas, they're at $10,000, $11,000 a month in income. They're making less money. And it's mostly because of the cost of labor, right? So I think that's a really important one. There is some type of balance between, okay, here's my income. It can be really high, but what is my cost of land? What does it cost to build? And then the most important is, what are these costs for labor? Because as you start getting into some of these areas, or you have these minimum wage laws that are getting crazy or just whatever it is, like it can be crazy, crazy expensive. That is most of my expenses is my labor. So that is something really important to consider, because on the flip side of this, you may say, hey, you know what? I'm looking at this other market. It's maybe a little bit more peripheral and we're looking at, $5,500 or $6,500 for rents, right? And you know what? You push all of those things forward, your cost of land, your cost of staffing, and maybe it's like $16, $17 an hour, right? And then you push it all forward and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm making, 40 plus grand a month on profit on this kind of deal. I didn't think I can push that, right? And so there is a big difference between what you're charging for rent in certain markets versus, if you charge the same amount of rent in a different market. I mean, the profit can literally be half based on the labor. So that is another important lesson to look at, because there is a fine kind of little balance here between choosing these markets and saying, hey, I'm just going to go to the most expensive market, because you know what? That might not give you the best profit. There's kind of a middle ground in there, maybe a little sweet spot sometimes, where you can find an area where you get a good, maybe, medium plus to high income, and then your cost of land and construction is not crazy high. It's pretty medium. And then your staffing is kind of medium. Really, the staffing, though, that can blow up your whole deal, and you push everything forward and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm making, way less than I thought it was going to be. And your buddy, in another state has the same type of income and his expenses are half of what you have. But on the flip side of this, I do think there is a minimum, right? There is areas that are too low, that the price for your income is just too low. So for me, I think my minimum is about $100,000 a month. So what I mean by that, if I have 16 rooms, that's about $6,250 a month, right? If I can charge on average $6,250 times 16 beds, then that brings me about $100,000 a month. On that income, I can push forward and say, okay, if I'm in a pretty normal market, my labor, my building costs, my expenses, my taxes, insurance, all that kind of stuff will push forward and will give me somewhere between a $30,000 and a $40,000 net profit. But if I'm lower than that, $100,000 a month, then really I think it starts kind of a domino effect of now I can't have the best care, right? I have to pay less for labor. I can't have two managers. So now not only do I have, care that's kind of right? But I also have a lack of time freedom. I'm also spending too much time at the assisted living running the business because I don't have the staffing that I really need. So I do think that it is really important that you are able to have the numbers to pay for staff, right? Staffing, great staffing is the core. It's the foundation to what we do here. They are the front line. They make the biggest difference. So you have to be able to pay them well. And what I mean by that is relative to their competitors. You need to pay more than your competitors, right? If you can do that, then you will keep the best of this group of people and keep them happy. And then from there, once they are happy, your residents are happy, and then you have your time freedom, right? I think that is really the goal here. So the last thing is really your population. Are you in an area that is too small? Is it too rural? And I don't want to say here's a number, right? Of like, oh, this is too small town, you shouldn't do it here. I think you can kind of use some common sense if it is too small town. But there's been a couple cities near me, a couple hours away, kind of out in the country here in Texas, that are like 10,000 people, and then next door to it, maybe 20 minutes away, about 15,000 people. And man, I honestly really like some of these small towns. I think there's a lot of opportunity. It can be kind of small, but isn't in an area where people are going out to retire, where they have more wealth going out to that area. So I would consider that. Small is okay, but not like too small where there's like not even a grocery store, right? If you are kind of smaller size, but you know what, here's a more affluent area in that smaller size, then I think that can be a fantastic place to be. But here was what I would say to check this is really what are the results of other people around? Or let me rephrase that. What are the results of your competitors, right? And again, as you're talking about small town, a lot of times there may not be what we are trying to build. There's definitely not any mansions out there, right? There may be big smelly facility. There might literally not be a licensed assisted living in some of these towns. They may just be nursing homes, like literally like a license for nursing home. And so compare those things. What is the nursing home getting for pricing? Are they really kind of low end and kind of scary and gross? Then maybe that's not the right market, right? If the only option is, half of what you want to charge, maybe you want to avoid that. But if your competition is charging good rents and you know that my labor is lower here, my cost of land is lower here, construction is lower here, you know what? Maybe you don't have to have the highest price mansion, right? Maybe you could be in that $5,500 to $6,500 for end of life care and still make 30 plus, because as you trickle things down, your expenses and labor and all those things are not quite as much. So to wrap this up for you guys, I talk to people literally all across the country, and they tell me about the land they're looking at, some certain deals they're checking out. And honestly, there are some places where it's like, no, you just shouldn't do a deal there, right? Like, no, you should not be in that city. No, you should maybe not be even in that state, right? Like, use some of these principles here. Take a look at the metrics. Take a look at the government there. What are the rules? How are the regs set up? Are they set up in your favor, or are they really just a bunch of hoops and paperwork in front of you so that, really you fail and they have less work to do? So check out these numbers, right? You don't have to be the highest of the high in order to make great money. And if you are the highest of the high, be careful and take a look. What are my labor numbers? Because you know what? You may have this huge income level, but at the end of the day, you might have so high in expenses that it really doesn't make this the best kind of bang for your buck. You could probably come in, build something at half the price and make the same profit in some other area. But again, you have to be happy. This is your life, right? Like, so choose an area where you have family, where you have friends. That's a beautiful place in the country that you want to be, where you don't have like huge pterodactyl-sized mosquitoes, and you're going to love your life, right? This is what we're talking about here. How to get one deal that will change your life, that can create early retirement, that gives you that time freedom to be with your family, and gives you all the income that you need. So that's it for today. As you know, I don't run any ads on this show. I don't sell anything. My only goal is to help future entrepreneurs do a life-changing deal to be able to get to financial freedom. So if you can help another entrepreneur, I would appreciate it. All you have to do is share this show. Find someone who has a big dream, who has a big goal, and they need to be able to implement some kind of deal and say, hey, you know what? Have you heard about these mansions? Right? Check this out. This is a life-changing opportunity. So thank you all so much. I will see you on the next one.